In 1928, a lone mountaineer camped high in the snowy Karakoram Mountains in India prepared his gear as a storm approached. When he stepped outside, he saw a bright glow in the distance and began climbing toward it. Through the snow, he discovered a large spherical object covered by a thin layer of ice. Curious, he struck the ice with his pickaxe, but as soon as he made contact, the sphere emitted a blinding flash that threw him backward and knocked him unconscious. When he awoke, the sphere was gone, leaving only silence and a circular scar glowing faintly on his hand. Many years later, in 2008, astrobiologist Dr. Helen Benson lectured her students at Princeton University about the possibility of extraterrestrial life forms. After class, she declined an invitation to a party and returned home to her suburban house, where a young stepson Jacob played video games and refused to eat dinner. Their relationship was tense, marked by distance and grief over the death of Jacob's father. As Helen prepared for the evening, her phone rang. An unknown voice told her that a car was on its way for her and that she must leave immediately. Before she could ask questions, police cars arrived at her home and an FBI agent knocked on the door, ordering her to come with them. Confused and alarmed, Helen refused to go until her neighbor came over to look after Jacob. Once she was assured he would be safe, Helen got into the car and was driven away under police escort. Inside the vehicle, she repeatedly asked where they were taking her, but the agents could not or would not answer. The motorcade arrived at an airfield, where she boarded a helicopter already filled with other scientists experts from different fields who were equally confused. The helicopter took them to the Linwood Military Academy in New Jersey. Upon arrival, military guards instructed everyone to surrender their cell phones, but Helen discreetly hid hers under her clothes. Inside, she met her old friend, Dr. Michael Granier, who explained that she had been placed on a critical government list because of her expertise. He led her to a conference room filled with scientists and military officials. There, a general revealed the situation. An unidentified object from space was approaching Earth at tremendous speed, following an unusual trajectory. Based on the calculations, the object was expected to strike Manhattan within a little over an hour. The group realized that the collision would kill millions. Since the object's speed made it impossible to shoot down, the government had formed an emergency response team to handle the aftermath. During a short break, Helen hid in the bathroom and used her phone to call Jacob, instructing him to hide in the basement until she returned. Her call was overheard by a female officer, but rather than report her, the woman quietly asked to borrow the phone so she could call her own family. Soon after, the scientists and soldiers traveled by helicopter to the anticipated impact site. Through the windows, they saw the night sky glowing as the object approached. The countdown reached 0, but no explosion occurred. Instead, a large luminous sphere slowed down and descended gently into Central Park, lighting up the city. The crowd scattered as police and the military surrounded the area with floodlights and barricades. The scientists put on protective suits and cautiously advanced toward the glowing sphere, which pulsed and hummed with energy. As they reached the perimeter, a small opening formed and an alien figure stepped out of the light. The creature extended its hand toward Helen, but before she could respond, a nervous soldier fired his weapon. The shot struck the alien, who collapsed into Helen's arms. In the next instant, a towering robotic figure emerged from the sphere, emitting a powerful electromagnetic pulse that shut down every vehicle, weapon, and light in the area. A piercing sound filled the air, stunning everyone nearby. The robot then turned toward the fallen alien, but when the alien made a subtle gesture, the robot froze in place and the power returned to normal. The wounded being was rushed to a military laboratory. Doctors and soldiers surrounded the operating table, uncertain how to treat a non-human patient. As the alien's condition worsened, Helen suggested calling in a surgeon to remove the bullet. The surgeon arrived and began operating, discovering that the outer layer of the alien's skin was gray and fibrous, almost like organic armor. When the surgeon peeled it away, he found beneath it a human-like body. The gray layer cracked and detached completely, revealing a being with human features. The medical team stared in shock as the alien's face and hands looked exactly like a man. After surgery, the alien was placed in a transparent capsule for observation. Helen watched as his heartbeat stabilized and his breathing normalized. Suddenly, the alien awoke in panic, pressing against against the walls of the capsule. Helen spoke calmly to him, assuring him he was safe. Her voice seemed to soothe him, and he repeated her words slowly, as if learning to speak. He now appeared identical to the mountaineer from 1928. Meanwhile, panic spread across the world. Governments declared states of emergency. Financial markets closed, and mass evacuations began. People around the globe fled cities, fearing an alien invasion. The U.S. president and vice president retreated to secure bunkers, leaving Secretary of Defense Regina Jackson in command. Reports soon confirmed that the aliens had hacked into an American spy satellite, gaining access to classified defense systems. More glowing spheres were landing around the planet, causing widespread alarm. At the laboratory, scientists analyzed tissue samples from the alien's body. They discovered that his cells contain a mixture of 3 DNA types, human and 2 unidentified forms. The gray exterior was organic, functioning as a living protective suit. From this, they concluded that the aliens had once visited Earth and obtained human DNA, which explained the scar left on the mountaineer decades earlier and why the alien now looked human. When Regina visited the lab, the alien sat upright and asked for water. His hand trembled as he lifted the glass, explaining that he needed time to adjust to this new body. Regina tried questioning him, but he ignored her. When Helen gently asked for his name, he replied, Klaatu. He said he was a representative of a group of civilizations and requested a meeting with all world leaders through the United Nations. Regina refused, stating that communication would be limited to her office. Believing Klaatu posed a serious threat, Regina ordered that he be sedated and transferred to a high-security facility for interrogation. Helen protested, arguing that Klaatu was the most important discovery in human history, but Regina insisted it was a matter of national security. Helen agreed to administer the injection herself. Given a vial of truth serum, she secretly swapped it for a vial of saline solution. In the interrogation chamber, Klaatu sat restrained as Regina informed him he would be moved to a secure base. He calmly stated that he intended to leave. Regina accused him of invading the planet illegally and blamed his robot for attacking the military. Klaatu replied that the robot only acted in self-defense when threatened. Regina dismissed his explanation and ordered Helen to inject him. Helen whispered that he must escape, then injected the harmless solution. Moments later, soldiers strapped Klaatu to a chair and attached him to a polygraph. An agent asked a series of control questions, but Klaatu remained silent. The machine suddenly malfunctioned as Klaatu took control of the system, sending a surge of electricity that stunned the agent. Using his power, Klaatu commanded the man to tell him the way out of the facility and to give him his uniform. Klaatu then accessed the building's security network, mapping the guards' positions. With another burst of high-frequency sound, he incapacitated them all and quietly walked out amid the chaos. While alarms blared, Helen managed to steal a small sample of Klaatu's gray tissue from the lab. Regina ordered every available unit to locate and capture the fugitive. Meanwhile, Klaatu reached a crowded train station where chaos reigned as trains were canceled and civilians panicked. Feeling hunger from his human body, he touched a vending machine and caused it to dispense a sandwich without payment. A child watched in awe, observing the frustration and anger of people arguing in line. Klaatu seemed to study their behavior. Soon he became weak, noticing his wound reopening, and collapsed in a bathroom stall. At home, Helen received a call from a paramedic who said that a patient at the station was asking for her by name. Realizing it must be Klaatu, she drove there immediately, picked him up, and helped him into her car. In the back seat, Jacob stared suspiciously at the stranger. Klaatu asked Helen for the gray tissue she had taken, and when she handed it to him, he pressed it to his wound, healing instantly. Meanwhile, the military launched an assault on the robot, still standing silent in Central Park. As soon as their missiles approached, the robot activated, emitted a burst of energy, and destroyed all military vehicles nearby. Every attempt to contain it failed. Commanders watched helplessly as the enormous machine stood unmoved, glowing with power. Helen followed Klaatu's directions, driving out of the city. Jacob complained that everyone was fleeing while the aliens destroyed their world. He said his father would have fought back if he were alive. Helen stayed silent. Eventually, Klaatu asked her to stop at a small roadside diner. Inside, an elderly man waited. Klaatu greeted him as Mr. Wu. Mr. Wu revealed that he, too, was one of Klaatu's kind. He had been living on Earth for 70 years, sent to observe humanity. He explained that he had found humans to be destructive and unchanging, driven by greed and violence. Klaatu agreed, saying the time had come to proceed with their operation. Mr. Wu, however, chose to stay, saying that despite their flaws, he had seen kindness and love among humans and now had a family of his own. Klaatu listened but remained resolute. Outside, news spread of the alien fugitive. The military reinforced barriers around the dormant robot, constructing metal walls to contain its power. Hotlines flooded with reports of sightings. Across the world, the mysterious spheres continued to hover, silent, waiting. Later, Helen drove Klaatu and Jacob toward New Jersey. The city behind them descended into confusion, and highways filled with people trying to escape. Klaatu stared out the window in silence. The night deepened as they left civilization behind and entered the forested countryside. As the car moved deeper into the woods, Klaatu suddenly asked Helen to stop. Without explaining, he stepped out and walked into the forest. Concerned, Helen told Jacob to stay inside the car and went after him. In the quiet darkness, she heard a faint humming sound and saw a swarm of small, glowing insects flying past her. Following their trail, she reached a lake surrounded by trees. Klaatu stood at the edge of the water, watching as the surface rippled with light. Moments later, a luminous sphere rose from beneath the lake, identical to the one that had landed in Central Park. Klaatu approached it and raised his hand. The sphere responded, emitting a bright pulse that illuminated the entire forest. Across the world, other spheres hidden in oceans, deserts, and jungles began to activate and rise from their resting places. Helen watched from behind a tree, realizing that the spheres were connected and that some vast process had begun. She ran back to the car, shaken, and found Jacob waiting. The boy noticed her expression and asked what she had seen. Helen said nothing, but Jacob grew suspicious and angry, accusing her of siding with the alien. He feared she would replace his father with Klaatu and ran into the woods. Helen chased after him, calling his name. Through the trees, both of them suddenly saw a beam of light rising into the sky. One of the glowing spheres ascended slowly until it vanished into the clouds, followed by others around the planet. Only the massive sphere in Central Park remained. Klaatu returned from the forest and told Helen that they needed to go back to the city. Helen refused until he explained what was happening. Klaatu finally told her that the Earth was dying because of human activity and that his mission was to save the planet, not the people. He said that few worlds in the universe could sustain complex life, and humans had brought theirs to the brink of destruction. To preserve it, humanity would be erased so that Earth could heal. Helen was horrified and pleaded with him to reconsider, insisting that humans could change if given the chance. Klaatu dismissed the idea, saying that his kind had observed humans for years and seen no change. The process had already begun, and it was now irreversible. At that moment, a police car appeared on the road, its lights flashing. The officer recognized Klaatu from the wanted alerts, drew his gun, and ordered them to surrender. Jacob shouted for Klaatu not to hurt him, but Klaatu said calmly that the man's pain would be brief. With a wave of his hand, he sent the car flying toward the officer, knocking him to the ground. Helen screamed, but Klaatu walked over, touched the wrecked vehicle, and transferred its electrical energy into the man's body, reviving. The officer gasped for air and looked around, alive but shaken. Klaatu explained that he had not intended to harm anyone, only to remove an obstacle. Helen realized that Klaatu still had control over the situation and begged him to stop whatever was coming. She told him there was someone he needed to meet, someone who could change his mind. Klaatu agreed to follow her. Meanwhile, at a military base, officials studied footage of the spheres that had left Earth. They discovered that the spheres were carrying living animals, fish, birds, and mammals away from the planet. Secretary Jackson concluded that the spheres were arcs, saving Earth species before humanity's destruction. Fearing that the end was imminent, she ordered the military to secure the giant robot, now called GORT, by enclosing it deep underground in a reinforced silo. Riots began spreading around the world, cities filled with smoke and chaos as people looted stores and fled. Amid the disorder, Helen drove Klaatu and Jacob to a quiet house in the countryside. Inside was Professor Carl Barnhart, a Nobel Prize winning scientist Helen had once worked. She believed that Carl's intelligence and compassion might reach Klaatu in a way her words could not. When they entered, Carl was at a chalkboard covered in equations. Klaatu paused and began correcting one of the formulas. Carl noticed and joined him, the two men quickly solving the equation together. As Carl stepped back and studied Klaatu, he realized who he was. Helen quietly confirmed it. Carl asked Klaatu how his civilization had survived so long. Klaatu explained that their sun had begun to die, forcing them to adapt and evolve to survive. Carl replied that change often came only when a species was at the edge of extinction. He said humanity was reaching that same point and deserved time to transform. Klaatu listened silently. In another room, Jacob turned on the television and saw a government alert showing Klaatu's image and a hotline number to report his location. Believing he was doing the right thing, the boy called the number. Minutes later, helicopters filled the sky. Outside, the sound of blades grew louder. Klaatu looked toward the window as the forest trembled in the wind. Carl told Helen to convince the alien not by argument, but by action. She nodded. Moments later, soldiers descended by rope and surrounded the area. Klaatu, Helen, and Jacob ran into the woods. Jacob shouted for help, waving his arms, and confessed that he had called them because it was what his father would have done. Helen told him his father was gone, but Jacob cried and turned away. A spotlight from one of the helicopters locked onto them. Soldiers grabbed Helen and pulled her into one of the aircraft. The other helicopters closed in on Klaatu and Jacob. Klaatu raised his hand, sending out a piercing frequency that caused the pilots to lose control. The helicopters collided and exploded in the distance. Jacob fled through the trees, terrified, until he slipped near a riverbank. As he fell, Klaatu appeared and caught him, pulling him to safety. Klaatu looked at Jacob and told him to come with him. The boy hesitated, then nodded. Meanwhile, Helen, now held at a military compound, pleaded with Secretary Jackson to let her go. She argued that Klaatu would listen to her and that only she could stop him. After a long silence, Jackson agreed, releasing her and assigning Michael Granier to accompany her. At the underground base, scientists tried to drill through Gort's metallic body. The diamond-tipped drill shattered instantly. When a technician examined the broken piece, he noticed tiny metallic insects crawling from the crack. Within seconds, the insects multiplied, eating through the machinery. The entire robot's surface began to dissolve, breaking apart into billions of small nanorobots. The swarm spread rapidly, devouring everything in its path, metal, concrete, and human flesh alike. The base sealed its doors, but it was too late. Within moments, the entire facility was consumed and reduced to dust. Military satellites tracked the swarm moving across the countryside like a storm cloud, erasing buildings, vehicles, and people as it advanced toward New York City. Missiles fired at it only created more particles. Panic spread through the command centers as the nanorobots devoured an entire stadium within seconds. The swarm appeared unstoppable. In the forest, Klaatu and Jacob found an abandoned cabin. Inside, Klaatu allowed Jacob to use the phone to call Helen. The line was weak, but they managed to agree on a place to meet. As they prepared to leave, Jacob admitted that he no longer wanted Klaatu dead and that he had been wrong about it. Klaatu listened quietly, his expression softening. They reached the cemetery where Jacob's father was buried. The boy knelt by the gravestone and begged Klaatu to bring him back, just as he had revived the policeman. Klaatu placed a hand on the stone, but shook his head, explaining that his power could not restore a life long gone. Jacob turned away, crying, and told Klaatu to leave him alone. Moments later, Helen arrived with Michael and ran to her stepson, hugging him tightly. Jacob clung to her and apologized. Helen told him she would never leave him. Klaatu watched the reunion silently, seeing for the first time the bond between them. He realized that in the face of loss, humans were capable of compassion and change. He turned to Helen and said that Professor Carl had been right. Species evolve only when standing at the edge of destruction. Helen begged him to stop the swarm, promising that humanity would change. Klaatu nodded slightly. By now, the nanorobot cloud had reached New York, consuming entire blocks as it moved towards Central Park. Secretary Jackson informed the president that they were attempting peaceful communication, but the president ordered continued military strikes. Fighter jets circled the area, dropping bombs in vain. Helen, Jacob, Klaatu, and Michael drove back toward the city. The streets were empty except for abandoned cars and barricades. Klaatu told Michael to keep driving, even as soldiers shouted for them to stop. The military eventually received new orders to let them pass. When they arrived at Central Park, they found the area deserted. The giant sphere stood silently in the middle of the devastation, glowing in the smoke. Without warning, fighter jets roared overhead and began bombing the park. The explosion flipped the car. Michael was killed instantly, but Helen, Klaatu, and Jacob survived. Flames surrounded them as the swarm closed in. The air darkened, filled with tiny metallic shapes that devoured everything. The car cracked apart as the insects ate through the metal. Klaatu pulled Helen and Jacob from the wreckage and led them beneath a bridge for cover. Jacob's nose began to bleed, and he collapsed. Helen soon felt her own body weakening as the nanorobots invaded their cells. She begged Klaatu to help them. He placed his hands on theirs, and the swarm began to flow out of their bodies into his own. The wounds on their faces healed as Klaatu absorbed the nanites. He looked at Helen one last time and said that humanity was capable of change, even at the brink. Then he stepped out from under the bridge and walked through the storm of nanorobots. His body began to dissolve as he moved toward the glowing sphere. When he touched its surface, a massive wave of energy erupted. The swarm disintegrated instantly, falling to the ground like dust. The sphere's light intensified, and every machine, light, and vehicle on Earth shut down. Cities fell silent as electricity vanished completely. Klaatu's body disappeared into the light. Helen and Jacob emerged from beneath the bridge, surrounded by silence and darkness. They looked up at the sky as the giant sphere lifted off and rose through the clouds, leaving Earth behind. The Earth stood still,